you know, like which ones would be better than the others? I mean, amongst the ones you mentioned yesterday.
Okay, so that's where bioindividuality comes in, and also the things that you talked about and you talked about, they are important for, again, bioindividuality means you look at the individual child, and what's important for this child is going to be different from what's important for this child over here. But I do think there are some foundational pieces that apply to all children, whether you're on the spectrum or not, and they're just health supporting practices, good nutrition. And I'm sorry, we live in the modern world and we don't eat well. You know, that's why we have massive epidemics of diabetes, obesity, you know, and children who are so vulnerable to the impacts of poor nutrition, I think are beginning to show the signs of that. So foundationally, what's the most important thing? My bias is nutrition and living in a healthful way, which means reducing a toxic exposure. We know toxins are bad for us. There's many, many neurotoxins that we interact with on a daily basis that are in our skin creams, that are in the soil and the air and the water. So that's an intervention. Eliminating toxins is an intervention. So I will say my bias is nutrition and living a no-tox, or if possible, a low-tox life. But beyond that, then you get into the sensory stuff, and then you get into the self-esteem building and all the different kinds of interventions on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I would like to, it is not possible to take questions from the audience because it will be a bit of a mismanagement. So if anyone has any burning questions, if they can write it on a piece of paper and then hand it over to me, you are most welcome to do that within this half an hour that we have. Okay, so getting on to Roshandeep, again, I just wanted to summarize what you discussed yesterday. In terms of, you mentioned about the 5 special senses, the auditory, olfactory, tactile, visual, and the gustatory, as well as you mentioned about the 2 inner senses, the proprioceptive and the vestibular senses, which are extremely important. You also mentioned about 3 types of sensory dysfunctions, the hyposensitivity, the hypersensitivity, and most interestingly about the seekers, which are specific to autism, I mean, relatively specific to autism, about the autistic child or a person suffering with ASD spectrum, seeking sensory inputs. And then you went on to describe about how tactile sensation is important in terms of socializing, exploring timings in environment, eating habits, attention deficits, etc. Then you mentioned about the importance of the proprioceptive senses, about good muscle tone and strength, the idea of variable forces required for specific activity. You mentioned the example of writing on a sheet of paper, then about gross motor and fine motor development. Then you went on to describe about the vestibular functions, about balance and equilibrium, eye-hand-body coordination, bilateral activities, and speech and language as well. Then you mentioned about a checklist for age-appropriate skills, and then you went on to describe the behavior issues. So I would like to, again in the question-answer session, the checklist was taken up in that question-answer session. But again, if you can highlight about what exactly you mean by a checklist, in terms of, one, how would the parents know that the child has a sensory processing disorder, a child with ASD spectrum, and also in terms of us clinicians who are not occupational therapists, about how we would be alerted in terms of identifying that there might be a sensory issue going on and refer to you guys appropriately.
Usually if a child comes to us and we have to assess the sensory processing disorder, we use 2 measuring scales. One is the SPM or the Vinidun. The SPM, that is sensory processing measure, is the newest one, and we try to use that. But obviously you need to have a certain certification to use that. As a teacher or as a parent, I think there are lots of checklists which are available online. You just need to type in the Google, and that will give you an idea whether you need to consult an occupational therapist or not. See, that's not the thing that sometimes we actually confuse between the behaviors and the sensory part. So, but still, it will give you a good idea. And if you feel that your kid is actually having more than few issues, then definitely you can consult the occupational therapist for it.
Right, and about the clinicians?
About the conditions, like...
about the clinicians, how would the other multidisciplinary team be aware of the sensory issues?
Yeah, I think in our situation, what I was discussing yesterday was that till the age of 3 or 4, the parents actually wait, and it's the teachers who basically in India are the primary one who says the parents something is wrong. So for them, uh, I think to have a little bit of a knowledge, maybe introduce into the courses, will be a very good thing. And I think we are working on it, where we can put on them, because many of the special educators, wherever I meet in India, they actually, the term sensory processing disorder is very new to them. And that's not justifying. That's really not justifying for the for the kid. Because as I said earlier also, it's very, if you can early detect it, you can treat it up to the extent.
Right. And what about I think the other very important issue is about the behavior issues. I did allude to the speech and language therapists being involved, like proper communication, how it involves, how it kind of reduces the externalizing behavior. But if you might also highlight about the sensory processing issues involved in the genesis of the behavior and how to address it.
Yes, see, sensory integration therapy is just a bridge. It's not a pure treatment. So that means you can apply the sensory integration therapy in ABA also. You can try to apply into the play skills also. So what I believe is that if there is a behavior and you feel that it's sensory oriented, you still need to work on the behaviors, but add the sensory perspective into it. And what I feel is that if a child has actually developed the skills, then the behavior may reduce also. Because if I have a skill, I know how to engage myself into an activity, obviously the behavior is going to decrease. So if I want to say about the activities, I should know how to do that. Maybe because of the tactile, because of the proprioceptive, I am not able to do it. So work on the activity, add a sensory perspective to it. Obviously, you are going to work on the behavior modification also. So all things needs to work together.
So engagement is the key.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So coming to Tali, I'll come back to you because there are a few questions, interesting questions which have come from the audience. But first, to summarize, it was an excellent talk about autism and self-esteem and critical strategies for developing a positive sense of self. And you mentioned about the 7 points. I just wanted to highlight those 7 points. To change your goal and change your question. Identify and cultivate your child's strength and passions. Develop your child's independence. Give your child the power to choose. Speak to your child's true intelligence. Teach to your child's true intelligence. Surround your child with people who believe in him. So I just wanted to, my first question to you would be, how would you handle expressed emotion issues in the parents to do this? I mean, these are all empowering the kids with the help of the primary caregivers as in parents. It's not only parents, it's also parents as well as other primary caregivers in terms of teachers and others. So if there is a sense of nihilism in, because of this disorder, so how would you first address it prior to going into all these steps?
A sense of what? Could you ask?
Sense of nihilism. I mean, sense of negativism, like my child won't improve or there wouldn't be any improvement in the near future. So how would you address that?
Just so I make sure I understand the question correctly. So how do you basically help a parent have a sense of hopefulness for their own child?
Parents, teachers, other primary caregivers who are involved with the children, with the child rather.
It's a great question because the 7 strategies that I talked about, I think this has been sort of true across the board over these last couple of days, is that everything we've been talking about are true for people with autism and are true for everybody. We are not reinventing the wheel. Going back to some basic nutritional components, sunlight, healthy living. It's like the people with autism are helping us remind ourselves how important some of these very basic and foundational things are. So when we talk about self-esteem, again, they're a targeted community that might have an especially big challenge with that area because of the stigmatization and underestimating of their abilities. But as different people came up to me and said, this is an important topic for everybody, us as professionals, parents, and family members. So those 7 strategies, actually, you can just flip them
and apply them to anybody. So if you even just take the first one, which is change your goal, change your question. So, and that actually was designed for the caregiver or for the parent in mind, because we're asking them to change the lens through which they see someone with autism. So if you're looking through a lens of, how do I close the gap? How do I make my kid more like that? All you're looking for is deficits. You're looking for all the ways in which there is a gap, all the ways in which they are different, all the things that need to be fixed. So that's going to be a very big burden to carry, both for a parent and for a professional. But if you change the lens and you change the question to, how can I help this person bring their unique self to the world around them as fully as possible, you're looking for different things. You're building a whole different case. You're seeking different kind of evidence to support what are his strengths, what are his passions, what are his gifts. And then that fuels your own motivation, your own hopefulness, your own enthusiasm, both for who this child is today and for what's possible for them. So these strategies are really holistic strategies for the person with autism, for the family of a person with autism, and for the therapists that are working with them.
Thank you very much. This question has come from the audience for Beth. Is there any diet chart which you would suggest for improved neurotransmitter functioning?
Did you say diet?
Diet chart. Is there any diet chart which you would recommend?
So again, I hate to be a broken record, but bioindividuality is key when it comes to diet. So one of the things that I think has been documented very well in the medical literature is that there's a huge inflammatory component to autism spectrum disorders, but also to bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety. There's actually an excessive level of inflammation in the body. Oftentimes that inflammation begins in the gut. Okay, so what does that mean? It means our body is rejecting something that's going into our gastrointestinal system, okay? So if a common strategy I've seen used, which has been recently documented in the literature, is looking at foods that are consumed on a daily basis, because oftentimes foods that are overconsumed, like let's say you eat wheat every day, and you develop an inflammatory response to it. So every time you put wheat into your body is responding with inflammation. And that can impact brain function, that can impact everything in your body. It has all kinds of downstream effects. So by removing the wheat from the diet, for instance, that's going to tamp down inflammation. Okay, but getting to your specific question about serotonin, for instance, if you're trying to regulate or modulate serotonin in the gastrointestinal tract, you have to pay attention to the gut microbiota, which is the microbes in and around the body, but specifically in the gastrointestinal tract, because those microbiota actually are responsible for producing serotonin. So that's a complicated dynamic to address, and you'd want to work with a practitioner who really understands the microbiome, how to modulate the microbiome. There's many integrative physicians and functional medicine practitioners who do just that. But a common strategy that is used, I would say, by these practitioners is eating high fiber diets that are diverse. In other words, there was some research done by a series of research at Stanford University and a researcher named Jeff Leach, who looked at the microbiome and how to create a diverse ecology in the microbiome. And what they found is that if you consume a lot of different kinds of fibrous materials, so many different vegetables, for instance, or fruits and vegetables, you're going to increase the diversity of the microbes in your gut. And increasing the diversity is going to support neurotransmitter production, but it's going to support detoxification, it's going to support immune function. So the short answer is there's probably many ways to impact serotonin in the body. A microbiome strategy is just one of them, but to generalize that even further, microbiome health is often marked by increased diversity of microbial species. So that is how people develop their therapies or strategies, is by trying to increase diversity of microbiome.
Yeah, in fact, the whole story about this gut-mind connection and the microbiomes is not only for autism, it's for all other neurodevelopmental disorders as well as OCD and other disorders. So there's a lot of work going on in the spectrum of prebiotics, probiotics, and the rest as well, apart from the diet which you mentioned about. So, Roshandeep, my question to you, I'll come to the audience question later. How early is early and how late is late?
Well, See, let's forget this word sensory right now. How early it is. Uh, you know, I think yesterday also I have said this. The role of the pediatrician is very important, and now the studies have actually gone up to the extent of to check the reflexes. When a child is born, he is born with certain primitive reflexes which later on gets integrated. So maybe if the reflexes are not getting integrated, the pediatrician can say, fine, something is wrong in the central nervous system, you need to get it checked. So that's as early as I can believe it. And as late, there's nothing late because learning happens until we die.
What I meant was how late is that there are few behaviors which get ingrained in the child due to the sensory processing problems, but gets ingrained in the child, and to cut that habit or cut that behavior, it becomes problematic. So the question, if I can reframe the question about when does it become difficult for the interventions to work?
Maybe after the age of 7 and 8 years. Then I think behaviors are quite strong. The brain has actually adapted those behaviors, and the behavior strategies would work better than the sensory one.
Okay, okay. This question is for Tali. This has come from the audience. In case there is a same age sibling living with the special child, that is twins, or even I think it can be twins, or it can be other siblings as well. I mean, this is my addition. Is it better to include the sibling in all the therapies as a facilitator, or will it create any anxiety issues in the long run in the sibling?
Sorry, there's like an echo, so it's a little hard for me to understand. Should the
sibling? So, yeah, if in the case there is a sibling, yeah. I mean, of this the person in the spectrum, be it a twin or be it any sibling, so is it better to include them as facilitators in the process, or or on the other hand, would it increase the anxiety in them?
Okay. So it's interesting. I feel like as more questions are being asked and more people are presenting, we keep coming down to some simple basic tenets, which is it's bio-individual, it depends on each person. So my answer is going to be the same in terms of that, which is that it depends on the sibling. It depends on the family dynamic. So I think, as I forget who it was who spoke earlier, I think it was you, Robert Bernstein, who talked about how at the end of the day, almost every sibling wants to help their kid, help their brother or sister. I wouldn't say that that's my experience 100% of the time, but I would say that is the majority of the experience. But I think that's why it's important, just like we want to ask our own child with autism, how is this therapy working for you? How is this working for you? Is this a good move for you? Is this not a good move for you? And let them have agency and let them direct what's going on in their lives as much as possible. Can't happen for everything, but as much as possible. The same thing for your neurotypical child or the sibling of your child with autism. Some of them make it very clear they want to be involved. They want to be, and they can be some of the best facilitators, especially when it comes to play and social skills. I know many kids that I've worked with, and their best teachers have been their siblings. That's where they learn how to play. That's where they learn to take turns. That's where they learn to negotiate. That's where they learn to be flexible. Think about a family right now where that relationship is totally blossoming, where it didn't exist before, and it is the most nurturing and supportive relationship this child has. But that's not always the case. So sometimes you might have a sibling who just wants space, just wants to do their own thing, just wants to have their own life, is sort of sick of all the focus being around their sibling and want to have their own interests and their own needs met and their parents to come to their soccer games and not have it always be revolving around their sibling with autism. So I think it's important to ask. I think it's important to let them decide. And that answer might change. At 7 or 8 years old, they might say yes, and by 10 years old, they might be done. Or the opposite could be true. Or they might not know how to be involved, so we can come up with different ways and different options. So I think a sibling relationship can be one of the most powerful relationships, but it has to be something that the sibling wants.
Yeah. So what is coming across is that, you know, these strategies need to be very person-centered. I mean, it will depend on the family environment. It will depend on loads of other factors. So across the board, actually, for all kinds of therapies, it has to be, ultimately there are theories, there are means of, there has to be a structure, but that structure has to be modified on the basis of the person and the person's environment.
And can I just say something? I think that's very true. And I think there's a tendency or a desire to get blanket answers, because that might like simplify things. Like, okay, yes to siblings, no to this diet, yes to that, and everyone just go and run off and do your thing, because you're seeking simplicity and seeking clarity. But the truth is, it actually can be much more simple and much more clear if you just take your attention to the child and look there for the answers. I think so that can gain, you can gain a lot of clarity doing it that way versus trying to find prescriptions or protocols that will fit every child.
Right, thank you. So this question is mainly about coordination, perhaps. While intervention starts early, when a developmental pediatrician or a psychiatrist refers the patient for OT and special education, when both of these follow the same activities, how do you coordinate basically? How do you judge that it is getting in the right direction, the therapy is going in the right direction? So what the question means is that how do you prevent overlapping of therapeutic interventions in terms of, because it's a multidisciplinary involvement, so how do you prevent, or is there any ways of addressing the overlapping, like for when an OT and a special educator and a speech and language therapist is involved?
Even the medications also. Well, it's very hard. I don't know about how it happens in India, in US, but in India, parents are quite curious. When supposedly if a child has been diagnosed with the spectrum, they want to go for everything at a time. They want to start with the medication, the speech therapist, the OT. And the problem we have is we all professionals are working in our own domain, and we don't have a good coordination with each other. So the most important thing between the professional first is to have a good coordination with each other, because it's not the parent who will be able to judge it. It's first the professional who will be able to judge it, whether what thing is working for them. For me, I think the coordination is very hard, because you cannot say parents that, okay, stop this session for a week, I'll take your child for a week and just wait if I am going to show the development, because if the development is coming, it's coming because of me. That doesn't happen practically, because the child has to go for numerous amount of sessions. He goes to the school. So practically it's very, very, very difficult. But yes, with the medication, I think I want to give myself a chance. Similarly, the speech therapist and the communication therapist wants to give himself a chance before telling them, okay, now you can go for the medications, because I can't see much development. Otherwise, but one more thing I want to add in it is that it's not only about that if I'm an occupational therapist, I'm having a knowledge about my field. I have to work with the speech, the communication, I have to work to develop the skills, I have to work to develop the play skills. So now every therapist should know every therapies. That's the most important thing. So yes, coordination is a little bit difficult, but I think I'll be able to answer within 2 or 3 years if I'll have a multidisciplinary clinic of my own. That will be easier for me to say that.
Okay, thank you. We are running out of time, otherwise I would have taken up a bit of an issue about the medication, but we just have about 8 seconds left. So final comments starting with Tali.
Final comments? Anything?
Anything you feel which is important for the audience.
I think 2 thoughts that I was thinking about. One is, someone mentioned earlier about empowering the parents, and I think so this panel was about...
It's okay.
I'm going to ignore that.
Yeah.
How to know what's the right therapy. And so I just want to bring down to 2 bottom line, what I consider to be sort of bottom line concepts, which is for the parents to really go with their gut and trust their intuition, which might seem like vague and unclear guidance, but I think as a parent, you know what I'm talking about. There are certain things that feel right, certain things that don't feel right. There's certain things that feel right at some times and don't feel right at other times. So the importance for the parent to really check in with themselves, no matter what professional is telling them to do whatever it is, and really assess it to make sure it feels right for you. And then to check in with the child in whatever capacity you can, whether it's through a verbal conversation, whether it's giving choices, whether it's observing very carefully their behaviors, to make sure that whatever you do for your child is both directed and led by your child, and that it feels in alignment with you as a parent.
Okay, Beth?
So I just want to echo exactly what Tali just said about parents checking in with their gut, because in 10 years that I've been documenting stories of optimal outcomes in kids, you know, dropping symptoms that they really don't want anymore, it has come down to a parent-led initiative where the parent trusted their gut, their instincts. I cannot say that enough. But just as a follow-up, it can be so isolating and so lonely to be a parent with a child on the spectrum where nobody understands what you're going through. So my number one piece of advice is to find another parent who's going through what you are going through. Find support. And actually say one of the really great ways to do this in 2018 is to find a Facebook group of like-minded parents who are doing something similar to you, or trying to do the same things you are to support your child.
Yeah, Roshan.
Yeah, as an Indian, I'm very happy that we are really getting very serious about the autism, and we are all, as a parent, as a professionals, we are working together. So that's something which is making me very happy, and the platform we have it here was something excellent. So I think we are doing a great job. We need to do even much better for it.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the three of you. My apologies that couldn't answer all the questions from the audience because of the brevity of time. It can be taken up with the individual therapists during the lunch break. Thank you so much. Thank you, organizers.